Previously on the Gaming Guillotine.
What happens if you can get your hands on a free desktop? Hi folks, my name's Gheeotine, and welcome to the Gaming Guillotine, where I extol the excellent and execute the poorly executed. And speaking of poorly executed, did you know that tariffs are a tax on imported goods that the American people— Wow, even though I made a video about it, even I didn't expect how fast our president was going to f things up over this past week, and if things aren't reversed quickly, me and my fellow Americans are going to be in for the big suck. I mean, more than before. Tariffs, ongoing trade wars, unstable global market factors, and Elon Muck-for-brains going after regulators for consumer protections are going to make gaming hardware that much harder to buy. Not just with the hardware price increases, oh hello Nintendo, but for the fact that prices for basic necessities are also going to go up, making luxury, leisure, or non-essential purchases harder to justify. That being said, people like gaming, and they're going to want to try and find things that distract them from the things about life that kind of suck. And I'm here to promote the sentiment that you do not need to break the bank in order to get yourself in the door for PC gaming. In fact, if you can find the right marketplace listing and are willing to engage in some pleasant conversation, you can get solid foundations for literally nothing. Last time we featured an 8-year-old general use laptop. It wasn't amazing, but we were absolutely able to find and play games. Then, at the end of the video, I alluded to a desktop that was acquired at the same time as that laptop. Unfortunately, while things initially looked promising, that desktop died while I was working on it. Easy come, easy go. Video dead? Not quite. While away on my business assignment, I took to the local marketplace listings and took a gamble on a machine. Funnily enough, it wasn't even initially free. I agreed to pay $50, showed up, and then we got to talking. He asked what I was gonna do, I said I just like tinkering and working on PCs, and he reveals that he was just gonna bring it to the local recyclers before I responded. At that point, he tells me to take it, and I walk out with an allegedly working machine and a massive smile on my face. So what is this PC? Well, let me say that at $50, this still would have been a great deal. The case is, I think, a Corsair 750D, and it has a 750-watt power supply. Alas, the PC becomes far less impressive looking further. The memory slots are filled with 4 2GB DDR3 RAM sticks for a total of 8GB. The graphics card is a measly GT 1030 with 2GB of DDR4 VRAM, and the motherboard somewhat reveals the last piece of the puzzle. The motherboard itself is an Asus Maximus 3 Gene, an MATX board with an LGA 1156 Intel socket. In that socket came a first-generation Intel i5 750. 4 cores, 4 threads, 2.66 GHz clock speed, and an 8MB cache. Not terrible, but not exactly anything to write home about. Hey, at least it has the ability to absolutely pants the A8 7410 APU that ran that laptop we were running. Also, once more, it's free. The only thing this computer didn't come with was a storage drive, so we turned to my usual favorite of a PNY CS900 2.5 SSD. A fresh install of Windows 10 later, and I'm greeted with a few surprises. First, for standard use like web browsing, this is really snappy. Second, I had issues with USB accessories until I did a BIOS update on the motherboard. Afterwards, I was able to use a Wi-Fi dongle for web access, but the BIOS update also vastly increased stability. Something essential when you realize that the CPU is literally over 15 years old. So, after getting everything set up, let's take a look at a few video games to see what we can expect from a machine that we got for free and only threw in an SSD to get working. What do we get with a computer that was one decision away from being thrown into a pile of scrap electronics? Well, starting with my now established bench test staple of Dirt 3, let me say that whenever I'm working with a GT 1030, I set my expectations as low. Imagine the pleasant surprise when the game defaulted to a mix of high and ultra settings. The game benchmark then told me to hang on for the ride as it averaged around 90 FPS with a minimum of 75. Excuse me, Mr. GT 1030, but you are not supposed to be impressing me like this. Gameplay was not too different. Whether in the middle of the pack jockeying for position or messing around way out in front, Dirt 3 was stable, performative, and fun. Moving on to a title I'm starting to get sucked back into, partially due to this machine, we have Cult of the Lamb. The ancient CPU did get hung up in the village sections, with followers all milling around performing their tasks and building devotion. The frame rate occasionally dipped below 30 FPS, but it was relatively stable. Moving to the Labyrinth Crusades, the action was readable and the combat manageable, peaking a little over 60 FPS, but never dipping below 45 after a room had finished loading. The Lamb proved to be as devastating as ever. Speaking of devastation, that's what happened to my perceptions of this machine machine when I threw Cyberpunk at it. Bearing in mind that I was impressed as hell when a 15-year-old processor, an entry-level video adapter, and 8GB of RAM even ran the damn thing, but playing it would be another matter. Averaging 15 FPS was about what the bench test could manage on lowest settings, and that actually remained consistent when I dropped the resolution down to 720p. Still, the fact Cyberpunk has been optimized enough to run on this setup at all is worth noting. Shadow of the Tomb Raider wasn't much better. The test settled at an average of 24 FPS, barely within the threshold of playability. Lowering the resolution would likely achieve a better experience, and shows the flexibility of a machine someone saw just about good enough to throw away. Journey by that game company showed that this PC could both handle an online co-op experience and a stable 40 frames per second. From dunes to temples, this machine could carry you through without issue. Expanding the scope of players from 2 to 24, Team Fortress 2 might have been a tad stuttery, and the GT 1030 seemed to have some mild screen tearing issues, but I was still able to frag. Unfortunately, this being a team-based game, I can only carry so much. Still, multiplayer was within reach, and if you're willing to turn on VSync and sacrifice a triple-digit frame rate for a stable 60, I don't think there's much to complain about. Switching to a single-player entry from Valve with Half-Life 2, in tighter spaces the frame rate would brush against readings of 300 FPS. With flames and physics effects going on, 60 was where it would want to settle. And again, at the really high rates, tearing became an issue. Of course, Valve's Adventures of Gordon Freeman are so optimized that you should be more surprised if you can find a machine that can't run Half-Life 2 in some form. In the laptop video, I broke out Metro 2033, and while initial results left me hopeful, the more open and chaotic moments ruined my hopes. Here, we had no such issues. On low settings, even under attack or in crowded areas, the frame rate stuck to around 45 FPS at 1080p, better than the original Xbox 360 release if you ask me. Fallout New Vegas is one that I run with VSync on by default because if you don't, at high frame rates, the game quickly deteriorates. With that in mind, on ultra settings, it was quite playable. Although I did wander into a Deathclaw settlement, and no matter what hardware I'm running, I don't think Boone was going to be able to help me out of this scenario. But finally, can it run Crysis? A question I'll be dissecting the history of in a coming video, but anyway, yes, Crysis Remastered on low settings settled at around 45 FPS and sunk to around 30 at more stressful moments. And given the age of the CPU, it's worth noting that the frame rate was a GPU bottleneck, and the i5-750 still had plenty to give. So that's the free PC as is. Not exactly great, but still pretty impressive considering what you can squeeze out of it. But let's say that, after the tough times come, things eventually get better and you're able to upgrade the PC. Believe it or not, given the platform we have, this thing has a surprising amount of headroom. So, let's say in this scenario, you're gonna go ahead and put in as much as you can. Let's see what we can do with this thing. Starting with the easiest pieces, the RAM. This motherboard supports a maximum of 16GB, so swapping 4 sticks of 2GB for 4 sticks of 4 for about $16, we are now safely in modern standards for recommended gaming. Next up is the CPU. The best processor this board can handle is the i7-880. However, as a general tip for builders, you can get very similar performance by going down 1 or 2 tier models, and save yourself a fair amount of cost. The CPU we're using today is the i7-860, which we got for $12. The i7-880, by comparison, regularly goes for over $50 to $70 from what research I could find, and only has about a 20% better performance metric. Spending 4 to 5 times for maybe a boost of 1/5 doesn't add up much to me. Since the i7-860 has double the threads and can turbo up to about 3.5 GHz, I elected to go for an overkill cooler to allow the CPU to run as fast as it could, as long as it could. I got this Be Quiet Dark Rock 3 when I was upgrading a friend's PC, and I've just been looking for an excuse to use it. Finally, the graphics card. I've heard that LGA 1156 motherboards can be extremely finicky and very selective on what GPUs work with it if you elect to use an RTX card. To bypass that headache entirely, I decided to go for the best non-RTX card available, the legendary GTX 1080 Ti. Still getting drivers at the time of writing, and with 11GB of VRAM, this card is still a modern powerhouse, being comfortable at even 1440p for many titles, and the price kind of reflects this. If you can get one for about $150, you're doing okay, but with the recent GPU inflation, you might have to raise your budget a bit. So, including the SSD, to upgrade this platform to the peak of what it's capable of, we spent about $220. For a machine that is easily capable of 1080p and potentially comfortable at 1440p, that is amazing. But enough speculation. Let's look at all the games from before and see how they are now. Dirt 3's average shot up to 144 FPS on ultra settings with the lows around 100. Not only did it look better, but it felt so much smoother. I can almost guarantee that the CPU is our main limiter and bottleneck, but who's gonna care if this is any indication? Cult of the Lamb, while also seeing improvements across the board, also brought us down to earth a little bit. In the village, the FPS bottomed out around 45, but in the dungeons, 120 FPS was the average after a room had finished loading, sometimes peaking at over 150. Ramming the Cyberpunk graphics settings to Ultra, this was the perfect illustration of where we were now limited. Fully taxing the CPU, but showing the GPU still had plenty more to give, we saw an average frame rate of 48 and a minimum of 32. Still, turn down crowds and you could likely get closer to parity, and it's still amazing considering the platform we're on, and the fact that the Foundation, once more, was free! On Ultra settings, Shadow of the Tomb Raider further validated the CPU bottleneck. The game's visuals looked great, but the frames, while extending all the way up to 200 at times, also bottomed out at around 35 depending on the action going on in the immediate area. Still playable though. Journey ran stable at about 60 FPS almost the whole way through, to the point where I had to verify that I hadn't accidentally turned on VSync. Nope, that's just where this game resides with an i7-860. Although I did find another player who proceeded to break the game with me. We might have both played this game way too much. Wait a minute, what am I saying? That's impossible. Team Fortress 2 is heavily CPU dependent, so while the frame rate did see an improvement, the graphics card rarely saw more than 15% usage. No complaints here though. I was still perfectly able to put smarmy players in their place on the receiving end of my hammer. Half-Life 2 was great. Obviously. If it was good before, it's good now. So let's give me a moment to take a drink before I record the next section of script and just appreciate some gameplay. Metro 2033 on very high settings looked great. In the settlement areas, we actually got to see the GPU being strained for once, going to about 45 FPS. The CPU, inversely, had plenty to give still. Lower the settings a tier, and we could likely see much better frames, but for immersion, this might not be a bad arrangement. Since I elect to keep VSync on with New Vegas, and I was already at ultra settings, I wasn't expecting much of a difference. One thing that was interesting to note, though, was that due to Fallout jank, we'd still see occasional frame drops to around 45 FPS. Otherwise, it was stable, but given how Fallout games can break in the most spectacular of fashions, this is fine by my standards. And if it could run Crysis before, it will most certainly do it now. It recommended upping from low to medium settings, but still saw lows of 75 FPS all the way up to over 150. Better looking, better running, and seemingly in parity with the utilization metrics. So there's how this machine performs when upgraded to a reasonable peak of what it can handle. But what if we wanted to be unreasonable? After all, this is the year of tribute to SLI. And most of the games I use today are SLI capable. If only I had a second 1080 Ti though, and I think I only saw one more PCIe cable, so I'd need an adapter, and then there's an SLI bridge. I found one more PCIe cable in the rat's nest, so I guess I don't need this. Let's start with Crysis. For laughs, I set the graphics to the highest possible settings. Ha! I wish. Legitimately. However, setting it back to medium, the foliage decided it wanted to choose violence against those with epilepsy. Tweaking the settings and method by which the cards rendered the game, we got back to looking good, but it just continued to make me scratch my head. Both cards in medium settings were being used more than when in solo configuration, and the frame rates were lower. You know what? I'm moving on. I can only take so many mind games with SLI setups. The Shadow of the Tomb Raider test continued the mind on ultra settings, highs were higher, lows were lower, and yeah, we were still CPU bottlenecked. TF2 continued the trend of being interesting. Seeing frame rates jump anywhere from 60 to 180, while rarely seeing the CPU or either of the GPUs go up over 35% use. Look, I'm recording this script at 9:30 in the morning. It is too early for this shit. Dirt 3, help me out here. Oh, okay, at least that's more stable. That tracks. A second GPU did nothing. It's almost identical to the single card reading, showing that the frames in this setup are without question CPU bottlenecked. Half-Life 2, 120 to 300 FPS. Hang on, I'm taking another drink. It's not alcohol. Yet. Metro 2033 doubled in frames. I swear, at this point, each game is its own unique surprise. But on Ultra settings, it looked legitimately great. I might very well decide to play Metro again on a machine similar to this. New Vegas? Yeah, no change. VSync enabled lest something explode. Frames still occasionally did dip to the mid-40s, and honestly, analyzing the results is giving me a headache. But once again, after I take a second to calm down, like in my 4-way SLI video, I want to make a point. I foresee a lot of people struggling over the next few years, and while it's not high in the hierarchy of needs, entertainment is essential for mental health, something to distract from the weight of the world. That's part of the point to my hardware-oriented videos. I'm trying to show that a little know-how can turn even garbage machines into a means of entertainment, lowering the cost of entry into a platform that, in the long run, is cheaper than consoles. And I'm not just going to illustrate that, I'm going to contribute, not just with knowledge, but in action. After tweaking the hardware a bit, I'm going to give away this machine along with a few more in my next hardware video. Some things are still in the planning phase, but if you've seen my videos on my $69 PC and then when I upgraded it, you'll likely see what I'm planning because that event is happening again. Getting back on track before I end for the day, today we looked at a machine that was intentionally built this way. But what happens when we take a look at hardware that we just look past on a daily basis? Business hardware, school computers, things that we couldn't in a million years imagine gaming on. Well, to find out, we're just gonna have to wait until the next hardware video. So until next time, and now if you'll excuse me, I really need to take care of this SLI-induced headache. Hey, thanks for sticking around all the way to the end. Remember that I give away Steam keys with my regular weekly uploads, and all you have to do to enter is leave a comment and have contact info on your YouTube profile. But as always, thanks for watching and keep your head on your shoulders.